In the rolling cornfields of Iowa, where grain elevators tower like monuments to harvest, some secrets lie buried beneath golden kernels. At 3:47 a.m. on October 12, 2023, the Prairie Gold Cooperative grain elevator stood against the Iowa night sky, like a towering concrete monument to harvest season. Floodlights illuminated the complex of bins and conveyor systems, while the steady hum of machinery filled the crisp autumn air. This was the height of corn harvest in Windham County, when farmers worked around the clock to bring in their crops before weather turned. The golden hour wasn't dawn. It was every hour during harvest season, when millions of bushels of corn moved through facilities like Prairie Gold. The cooperative had served as the economic heartbeat of this rural township near Riverside, Iowa, for 3/4 of a century. During peak harvest, the elevator never truly slept. Marcus Chen understood this rhythm better than most. At 34, he was a third-generation grain elevator operator, whose grandfather had helped establish the cooperative in 1948, whose father had served as board president through the difficult years of the 1980s farm crisis. Marcus had grown up with the smell of corn dust in his hair, and the sound of grain cascading through metal chutes as his lullaby. That October night, Marcus was manning the overnight shift alone, standard practice during harvest when every hour of good weather counted. His operator booth, positioned 30 feet above the facility floor, provided a commanding view of the entire operation. Banks of monitors displayed moisture readings, flow rates, and bin capacities. Radio chatter from incoming trucks crackled through speakers mounted on the wall. But when day shift supervisor Dale Morrison arrived at 4 a.m. for the changeover, the booth was empty. Morrison found Marcus's thermos sitting on the control panel, still warm to the touch. His safety helmet hung on its usual peg, but his high-visibility vest was missing. Most puzzling of all, the main conveyor system was still running, something that should have been shut down hours earlier according to the night's grain delivery schedule. Marcus was meticulous about following shutdown procedures. Morrison later told investigators, "He'd been doing this job for over a decade, and I'd never known him to leave equipment running without cause." A quick search of the facility revealed Marcus's safety equipment scattered near Bin 7, one of the newer concrete silos on the north side of the complex. His work gloves lay on the catwalk grating, and his emergency radio, standard equipment for all operators, was found clipped to the railing 20 feet away, as if it had been dropped or thrown. The bin itself showed no signs of disturbance. Automated sensors indicated normal grain levels and temperatures. Security cameras covering the main approaches showed Marcus's pickup truck in the employee parking area, but no footage of him leaving the premises. Dale Morrison initiated the cooperative's emergency protocol, shutting down all machinery and calling both the county sheriff's office and Marcus's emergency contact, his younger sister Jenny, who lived in nearby Iowa City. By 5:30 a.m., Windham County Sheriff's deputies were walking the grounds, trying to understand how an experienced operator could simply vanish during the most critical harvest night of the season. The timing couldn't have been worse. October 12th marked the peak of corn harvest in the region, with moisture levels finally dropping to acceptable ranges after a week of intermittent rain. Farmers had been waiting for exactly these conditions, and grain trucks had been lined up since midnight, waiting to unload. The Prairie Gold Cooperative handled grain from over 40 family farms across 3 townships, a responsibility Marcus Chen had never taken lightly. He lived for harvest season. His sister Jenny would later tell investigators. This was his Super Bowl, his World Series. Marcus would never abandon his post, especially not on a night like that. Something happened to him in that elevator. As dawn broke over the cornfields of Windham County, the question that hung in the air was as thick as the grain dust settling on the facility's metal surfaces. Where was Marcus Chen, and why had he left behind the operation he'd dedicated his life to protecting? To understand Marcus Chen's disappearance, investigators first had to understand Prairie Gold Cooperative itself, a complex agricultural entity that was simultaneously a business, a community institution, and a family legacy spanning 3 generations. Established in 1948 by returning World War II veterans seeking economic stability, Prairie Gold had weathered the ups and downs of American agriculture for 75 years. The cooperative model allowed local farmers to pool their resources for grain storage, processing, and marketing, giving them leverage they couldn't achieve individually. Marcus's grandfather, Chen, had been one of the original 12 founding members, contributing his savings and sweat equity to build the first modest grain bins. By 2023, Prairie Gold handled over 3.2 million bushels annually from 43 member farms across Windham County. The facility had expanded to include 12 concrete storage bins, 2 metal bins for temporary storage, grain drying equipment, and a rail siding for shipping to processing plants in Cedar Rapids and Davenport. The cooperative employed 8 full-time workers and hired seasonal help during harvest. But success had brought its own pressures. Rising land values, increased input costs, and volatile commodity prices had squeezed profit margins throughout the agricultural sector. Prairie Gold was no exception. According to financial records obtained by investigators, the cooperative had been operating with declining reserves for 3 consecutive years. "The margins in grain handling are razor thin," explained Dr. Robert Whitman, the county agricultural extension agent. "A few cents per bushel can mean the difference between profit and loss. Quality premiums and penalties can swing a year from black to red." Marcus Chen occupied a unique position within this system. As the senior night shift operator, he held certifications in grain moisture testing, quality assessment, and hazardous materials handling. During harvest season, he was often the only cooperative employee present for 12-hour stretches, making critical decisions about grain acceptance, storage allocation, and quality documentation. His family history with the cooperative gave him additional influence. His father, David Chen, had served as board president from 1995 to 2010, guiding the cooperative through modernization projects and the integration of computerized grain management systems. Marcus had grown up attending board meetings and harvest celebrations, learning the business from the ground up. But that legacy also brought pressure. Marcus felt responsible for preserving what his grandfather and father had built, his sister Jenny recalled. When problems arose, he took them personally. He'd stay late trying to solve issues that weren't necessarily his responsibility. Those unauthorized overtime hours became a focal point for investigators. Payroll records showed that Marcus had been clocking out at his scheduled 6:00 a.m. shift end. But security camera timestamps revealed his truck remaining in the parking lot for additional hours on 17 occasions over the 3 weeks before his disappearance. "He was staying to work on something," observed Sheriff's Deputy Laura Hansen, who reviewed hundreds of hours of security footage. "But he wasn't logging those hours officially. That suggests he was either doing personal business or working on something he didn't want documented through normal channels." The cooperative's board of directors, led by President Vernon Hayes, initially downplayed these overtime discrepancies. Marcus was a dedicated employee who took pride in his work, Hayes stated during an interview with investigators. If he stayed late to calibrate equipment or complete paperwork, that was consistent with his professional character. However, closer examination of the cooperative's operational records revealed anomalies that couldn't be easily explained. Quality control logs showed inconsistent moisture readings for grain deliveries processed during Marcus's shifts. Some loads that should have received drying treatment were marked as acceptable, while others that appeared to meet standards were flagged for processing delays. Grain moisture content is crucial in the commodity market. Corn delivered above 15.5% moisture faces significant price penalties, while grain below 14% commands premium prices. Accurate moisture testing can mean hundreds of dollars difference for a farmer's truckload and thousands of dollars in an aggregate for a cooperative seasonal intake. Marcus's certification as a grain inspector meant his moisture readings carried official weight with buyers and sellers. If those readings were inaccurate, either through equipment malfunction or human error, the financial implications could be substantial. If they were deliberately falsified, the legal consequences could be severe. "Grain fraud is a federal offense," explained Sarah Lindquist, a commodities inspection specialist with the Federal Grain Inspection Service. "When grain moves in interstate commerce, which most of it does, falsification of quality certificates can result in criminal charges. The USDA takes agricultural fraud very seriously. The more investigators examined Prairie Gold's operations, the more questions arose about Marcus Chen's activities in those final weeks. He had been the cooperative's most experienced and trusted operator, but he had also been working in isolation during the overnight hours, when oversight was minimal. The same qualities that made him invaluable to the cooperative, his technical expertise, his access to critical systems, his family legacy, also positioned him to potentially manipulate the very systems he was trusted to operate. As harvest season continued around his absence, one question loomed over Prairie Gold Cooperative. Had Marcus Chen been protecting the institution his family helped build, or had he discovered something that threatened to destroy it? Sarah Lindquist had been investigating agricultural commodities fraud for the Federal Grain Inspection Service for 8 years. But she'd never encountered a case quite like Prairie Gold Cooperative. The irregularities that brought her to Windham County in late September 2023 were subtle, the kind of discrepancies that might escape notice in the chaos of harvest season, but formed a troubling pattern when examined over time. The investigation began with complaints from grain buyers in Cedar Rapids. 3 separate processing facilities had reported inconsistent moisture levels in corn shipments from Prairie Gold over the past 2 harvest seasons. Grain certified as meeting standard moisture requirements was arriving with readings that varied significantly from the documentation. Sometimes the grain was drier than certified, which benefits the cooperative through higher payments, Lindquist explained in her preliminary report. But more often it was wetter than documented, which suggests either systematic equipment failure or deliberate misrepresentation. Lindquist arrived at Prairie Gold on October 2nd, 10 days before Marcus Chen's disappearance, to conduct a routine compliance inspection. What she found raised immediate red flags. The cooperative's moisture testing equipment, 2 electronic grain moisture meters and a backup oven drying system, showed calibration discrepancies that could account for the reported variations. Both electronic meters were reading consistently low, Lindquist noted in her inspection log. A grain sample that registered 14.8% moisture on Prairie Gold's equipment showed 16.2% when tested with our certified portable unit. That's a significant enough difference to affect pricing and storage decisions. More concerning was the discovery that only one employee, Marcus Chen, had been certified to perform official moisture testing during night shift operations. This meant that roughly 60% of the cooperative's grain intake during peak harvest was being processed through a single inspector's readings. That level of concentration is unusual but not necessarily problematic, Lindquist acknowledged. However, it does create vulnerability. If one person's measurements are consistently off, whether through equipment issues or other factors, it affects a substantial portion of the operation. During her initial inspection, Lindquist observed Marcus Chen working the day shift temporarily due to a scheduling change. She found him knowledgeable, professional, and seemingly committed to proper procedures. He readily answered her questions about calibration protocols and quality documentation, and appeared concerned about the moisture discrepancies she'd identified. He actually seemed relieved that someone was looking into the moisture issues, Lindquist recalled. He mentioned that he'd been getting complaints from some farmers about their grain being downgraded for moisture when their own testing showed different results. He said he'd been planning to recalibrate all the equipment during the post-harvest maintenance period. But security camera footage reviewed after Marcus's disappearance revealed a more complex picture. On multiple occasions between September 15th and October 10th, Marcus had accessed grain storage areas that were not part of his normal operational responsibilities. These restricted zones included bins 4 and 8, which stored grain awaiting rail shipment, and the cooperative sample storage facility where representative specimens were kept for quality verification. He had legitimate access to those areas, noted Dale Morrison, the day shift supervisor. Marcus held master keys as senior operator, but there wouldn't normally be reason for night shift personnel to be in the sample storage building or the rail shipping bins unless there was an equipment problem or emergency. Security timestamps showed Marcus spending between 30 minutes and 2 hours in these areas during his unauthorized overtime periods. The cooperative's computerized grain management system showed no corresponding work orders, equipment maintenance logs, or operational issues that would explain these extended visits. More intriguingly, Lindquist's analysis of moisture test records showed that grain quality documentation became notably more accurate starting in early September, roughly coinciding with when Marcus began his unauthorized overtime hours. Instead of the systematic underreporting of moisture levels that had characterized the previous 2 seasons, recent readings aligned closely with independent testing. Either the equipment problems suddenly resolved themselves, or someone began making adjustments to compensate for the calibration issues, Lindquist observed. The timing suggests Marcus Chen may have been aware of the moisture discrepancies and was taking steps to address them. This revelation cast Marcus's disappearance in a new light. Rather than being involved in fraud, he appeared to have been working to correct systematic problems that had cost farmers and buyers hundreds of thousands of dollars over multiple harvest seasons. But if Marcus was trying to fix the problems, why was he working in secret? And who, if anyone, knew about his efforts? Lindquist's investigation took on new urgency after Marcus vanished. Federal agricultural fraud cases required clear documentation of intent and financial impact. If Marcus Chen had been systematically correcting falsified moisture readings without authorization, it raised questions about who had been responsible for the original inaccuracies, and whether they knew Marcus was undermining their system. Agricultural cooperatives operate on trust and community relationships, Lindquist noted. When that trust is violated, whether through fraud or whistleblowing, the consequences can extend far beyond financial losses. People's livelihoods, family legacies, and community institutions are at stake. As her investigation continued in Marcus's absence, one question haunted Sarah Lindquist. Had Marcus Chen disappeared because he was exposing agricultural fraud, or because someone wanted to prevent him from exposing it? Dr. Robert Whitman had been Windham County's agricultural extension agent for 22 years, long enough to understand that the technical challenges of farming were often inseparable from the human dramas that played out in rural communities. When investigators approached him about Marcus Chen's disappearance, Whitman realized he possessed crucial context that others might have missed. The 2023 growing season had been particularly stressful for corn producers across Iowa. After a promising start with adequate spring moisture, a severe drought struck in July and August, just as corn entered its critical pollination period. Rainfall totals from June through September measured only 60% of normal levels, creating widespread crop stress and significantly impacting grain quality. Drought stress affects corn in multiple ways, Whitman explained to investigators. Beyond reducing yields, it concentrates sugars and can result in higher moisture levels at harvest. Farmers who might normally expect their corn to dry naturally in the field were facing additional drying costs or moisture penalties at the elevator. Those penalties could be substantial. A farmer delivering 1,000 bushels of corn at 17% moisture instead of the standard 15.5% would face dockage of approximately $200, money that might represent the difference between profit and loss on that field. Multiply that across dozens of loads and hundreds of farmers, and the economic impact reached into hundreds of thousands of dollars. In late August, Whitman began receiving unusual inquiries from several cooperative members. Farmers were asking about moisture testing procedures, calibration requirements for grain testing equipment, and, most concerning, the legal implications of moisture content disputes. "I've been doing this job for over 2 decades, Whitman noted. Farmers ask technical questions all the time, but I'd never had multiple producers asking about legal protections for grain quality complaints. That suggested something more systematic was happening." One of those farmers was Dennis Kowalski, whose family had been farming in Windham County for 4 generations. Kowalski's corn crop had been particularly affected by the drought, and he was facing the prospect of significant moisture penalties for the first time in 15 years of delivering grain to Prairie Gold. Dennis came to my office in early September, visibly upset, Whitman recalled. He'd tested his corn with his own moisture meter and consistently gotten readings around 15.8%. But when he delivered to Prairie Gold, their test showed 17.1% to 17.4%. That level of discrepancy was beyond normal variation. Kowalski wasn't alone. By mid-September, Whitman had documented similar complaints from 7 different farmers, all reporting that their personal moisture readings didn't align with Prairie Gold's official tests. The pattern was consistent. Farmers' equipment showed grain at or near the standard 15.5% moisture level, while the cooperative's tests resulted in significant penalties. I advised them to recalibrate their equipment and consider getting independent testing, Whitman explained. But privately, I was beginning to suspect the problem might be at the cooperative level. When multiple farmers with different equipment get consistently different results from one facility, that's a red flag. What Whitman didn't know at the time was that Marcus Chen was also aware of these discrepancies. According to documentation found in Marcus's desk after his disappearance, the night shift operator had been contacted directly by 3 farmers asking him to double-check moisture readings on their deliveries. A handwritten note in Marcus's files, dated September 20th, read, D. Kowalski load, hash, 4038, were tested 15.9%, not 17.2%, as originally recorded. Equipment calibration issue. Check other recent readings. Additional notes showed similar discrepancies for loads from farmers Tom Bradley and Maria Santos. More significantly, investigators found evidence that Marcus had begun researching whistleblower protection laws related to agricultural fraud. His browser history, recovered from the cooperative's computer system, showed searches for USDA fraud reporting procedures, agricultural inspector whistleblower protection, and cooperative employee legal protections. On October 1st, Marcus had called Whitman's office requesting information about federal grain inspection procedures and the process for reporting suspected violations to the USDA. The conversation, which Whitman documented in his daily log, revealed Marcus's growing concern about systematic moisture testing problems at Prairie Gold. Marcus was careful not to make direct accusations, Whitman noted, but he asked very specific questions about equipment calibration requirements, documentation standards for moisture testing, and the legal responsibilities of certified grain inspectors. He was clearly wrestling with some kind of ethical dilemma. During that conversation, Marcus had also inquired about the potential consequences of reporting suspected violations. Whitman explained that federal agricultural fraud investigations could result in criminal charges, civil penalties, and loss of operating licenses for cooperatives. For employees, whistleblower protections existed but weren't always effective in small rural communities where business relationships were deeply personal. I got the impression Marcus was afraid, Whitman recalled. Not physically afraid, but afraid of the consequences of speaking up. His family had deep ties to Prairie Gold. His reputation in the community was built on his reliability and discretion. Becoming a whistleblower would change all of that permanently. The hidden documentation found in Marcus's desk after his disappearance showed he had been systematically recalibrating the cooperative's moisture testing equipment and maintaining parallel records of accurate readings. His unofficial logs documented corrections to over 200 grain deliveries between September 15th and October 10th, representing hundreds of thousands of dollars in improper penalties that had been assessed to farmers. But Marcus had never submitted his findings to federal authorities or approached the cooperative's board of directors with his concerns. Instead, he had been working in secret, apparently trying to correct the problems without exposing the systematic fraud that had been affecting his community's farmers for at least 2 harvest seasons. Marcus was caught between his loyalty to the cooperative and his responsibility to the farmers, Whitman observed. In a small community like this, there's no way to expose fraud without destroying relationships and institutions that families have built their lives around. He was trying to find a way to do the right thing without devastating the people he cared about. The question that haunted Dr. Whitman was whether Marcus Chen had found a solution to his dilemma, or whether someone had decided to solve the problem by making sure Marcus could never reveal what he knew. At 6:15 a.m. on October 14, 2023, the Prairie Gold Cooperative Board convened an emergency meeting in the cramped conference room above Hendrick's Feed Supply on Main Street in Riverside. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as 7 board members filed in, their faces grim in the early morning light filtering through dust-streaked windows. Board President Vernon Hayes, a third-generation corn farmer whose family had helped establish the cooperative in 1948, called the meeting to order. His voice carried the weight of someone who had weathered decades of agricultural crises, from the farm crisis of the 1980s to the trade wars of recent years. But this felt different. One of their own was missing. "We're here because Marcus Chen hasn't been seen for over 12 hours, Hayes announced to the assembled farmers and grain dealers. "Sheriff's Department is treating this as a missing person case. We need to discuss how we're going to handle operations and what information we can provide to investigators." The board members shifted uncomfortably in their metal folding chairs. Marcus's absence wasn't just a personal tragedy. It threatened the cooperative's ability to handle the remaining harvest. He was the only night shift operator certified on the new moisture testing equipment that had been installed just 8 months earlier. Treasurer Linda Morrison raised a concern that had been weighing on several board members. Marcus had been working unauthorized overtime for 3 weeks. None of us approved those hours. What was he doing during that time? Hayes deflected the question with practiced political skill. "We can discuss operational procedures later. Right now, our priority is finding Marcus and keeping the harvest moving. We've got farmers lined up for miles with corn that needs to be processed." But board member Jake Peterson, whose family farm supplied nearly 30% of the cooperative's annual volume, wasn't satisfied. "Vernon, I've been hearing rumors about moisture readings being inconsistent. Some of my neighbors are saying their loads are testing different numbers than what they're seeing on their own equipment." The room fell silent, except for the distant rumble of grain trucks on Highway 22-2. Hayes' jaw tightened. "Jake, if you have specific concerns about our procedures, you can file them in writing like anyone else." "That's just it," Peterson continued. "Word is Marcus was planning to do exactly that, file something in writing, to someone outside the cooperative. According to minutes from that meeting, obtained later through a Freedom of Information Act request, Hayes called for a 5-minute recess at this point. When the meeting resumed, the discussion focused strictly on operational concerns and search coordination efforts. What the minutes didn't record was what happened during that recess. Board member Sarah Lindstrom later told investigators that she overheard a heated conversation between Hayes and Morrison in the hallway. Linda was saying something about damage control, and Vernon was telling her to keep quiet until we know what we're dealing with. The meeting concluded with assignments for board members to coordinate with search volunteers and maintain elevator operations. Hayes announced that the cooperative would hire temporary operators from neighboring facilities to cover Marcus's shifts. As board members filed out, an anonymous tip came into the sheriff's office. A caller reported seeing Marcus's distinctive blue Chevy Silverado parked near the abandoned Farmers Pride grain elevator, 2 miles south of town. The facility had been shuttered for over a decade after its parent cooperative dissolved during a corruption scandal. Deputy Laura Hansen responded to the call at 8:23 a.m. Marcus's truck sat in tall grass behind the crumbling concrete silos, its doors unlocked and keys still in the ignition. The vehicle appeared to have been there for several hours. Morning dew covered the windshield, and the engine was cold to the touch. Inside the truck, investigators found Marcus's wallet with $127 in cash and all identification cards intact. His cell phone lay on the passenger seat, battery dead. Most puzzling was what they found in the truck bed. Several empty grain sacks bearing the Prairie Gold Cooperative logo, along with a portable moisture meter that didn't belong to the cooperative's inventory. The discovery of the truck raised more questions than it answered. Why had Marcus driven to a defunct grain facility in the middle of the night? What was the significance of the empty grain sacks? And who had made the anonymous tip that led investigators directly to the vehicle's location? As news of the truck's discovery spread through the farming community, the emergency board meeting's carefully maintained facade of cooperation began to crack. By evening, investigators would uncover evidence that Marcus Chen had indeed been planning to address federal agricultural compliance officers. The question was no longer just where Marcus had gone, it was who had wanted to stop him from talking. The anonymous caller who reported the truck's location was never identified, despite extensive investigation. Phone records showed the call came from a prepaid cellular device purchased with cash 3 weeks earlier. The timing suggested someone had been watching Marcus's movements and waiting for the right moment to direct investigators to evidence that would complicate rather than clarify his disappearance. On the afternoon of October 14, 2023, crime scene technicians from the Iowa Department of Criminal Investigation arrived at Prairie Gold Cooperative to conduct a thorough examination of Marcus Chen's work area. Lead investigator Detective Kim Walsh had requested the state team after local evidence suggested this was more than a simple missing person case. The grain elevator's interior buzzed with the mechanical hum of conveyor belts and grain dryers, creating an industrial symphony that had provided the soundtrack to Marcus's final hours. Detective Walsh noted that the elevator's main conveyor system was still running when Marcus was discovered missing. Unusual for an experienced operator who followed strict safety protocols. In the operator's booth on the 3rd level, technicians found Marcus's workstation exactly as he had left it. His coffee thermos sat half full, still warm at 3:47 a.m. when his absence was first noticed. A clipboard with moisture readings showed entries up until 2:15 a.m., with Marcus's distinctive handwriting documenting corn loads from the Peterson farm and 3 other local operations. But it was the grain dust patterns that told a more complex story. Senior technician David Chen, no relation to Marcus, had specialized in agricultural accident reconstruction for over 15 years. The dust patterns indicate sudden movement, he explained to investigators. When someone leaves a grain facility normally, they brush off their clothes, wash their hands. Here, we see grain dust scattered in a pattern consistent with rapid departure. Near Bin 7, investigators discovered Marcus's safety equipment, hard hat, reflective vest, and ear protection, scattered across a 15-foot area. The equipment showed no signs of struggle or damage, but their distribution suggested they had been dropped or thrown rather than carefully removed. Inside Marcus's desk, tucked behind operation manuals and safety bulletins, investigators found a partially written letter addressed to the United States Department of Agriculture's Office of Inspector General. The letter, dated October 10th, began, "I am writing to report systematic violations of federal grain quality standards at Prairie Gold Cooperative. For the past 6 months, I have documented instances where moisture content readings have been deliberately adjusted to." The letter ended mid-sentence. A forensic analysis of the paper showed no signs of tampering or forced interruption. Marcus had simply stopped writing. Cell phone records provided another piece of the puzzle. Marcus's phone showed 3 incoming calls between 2:00 a.m. and 3:00 a.m. on the morning of his disappearance. All 3 calls came from numbers registered to prepaid cellular services, making them virtually untraceable. Each call lasted less than 30 seconds. According to cellular tower data, Marcus's phone remained stationary at the grain elevator until 2:47 a.m., when it began moving south toward the location where his truck was later found. The phone's GPS signal disappeared at 3:15 a.m., approximately 8 minutes before the anonymous tip that led investigators to the abandoned Farmer's Pride facility. At the scene where Marcus's truck was discovered, soil analysis revealed an unexpected finding. Forensic botanist Dr. Jennifer Martinez identified corn kernel fragments that didn't match any varieties currently grown in Windham County. These appear to be from a white dent corn variety that hasn't been commercially grown in Iowa for over 20 years, Dr. Martinez reported. The kernels show signs of recent handling, not decades of weathering. More intriguing was the discovery of fresh tire tracks near the truck. The tread patterns didn't match Marcus's Silverado or any of the sheriff's department vehicles. Instead, they appeared to belong to a larger truck, possibly a grain hauler or semi-trailer. The tracks led from the main road to within 20 feet of Marcus's vehicle, then returned to the road heading east toward Interstate 380. Investigators also found a business card wedged under the truck's windshield wiper. The card belonged to Thomas Brennan, a commodities broker based in Cedar Rapids who specialized in grain futures trading. When contacted, Brennan claimed no knowledge of Marcus Chen or any reason his card would be at the scene. I distribute hundreds of those cards at grain elevators across eastern Iowa, Brennan told Detective Walsh during a phone interview. Anyone could have picked one up. But I can tell you this, if someone was manipulating moisture readings systematically, it would affect commodity prices. That's federal crime territory. Perhaps most puzzling was evidence found inside the abandoned Farmer's Pride elevator itself. Despite being shuttered for over a decade, investigators discovered signs of recent activity in the facility. Fresh footprints in the grain dust, recently disturbed equipment covers, and what appeared to be temporary lighting installations suggested someone had been using the facility for unknown purposes. A thorough search of the abandoned silos revealed caches of grain samples stored in labeled containers, some dating back months. The samples represented corn from dozens of different farms throughout the region, far more than any single cooperative would normally handle. Laboratory analysis would later show that many of these samples had moisture contents that differed significantly from the levels recorded on official grain inspection certificates. As investigators pieced together the physical evidence, a complex picture emerged. Marcus Chen hadn't simply vanished. He had been lured away from his post during critical harvest operations. Someone had arranged to meet him at the abandoned grain facility. Someone with detailed knowledge of both his work schedule and his growing concerns about quality standard violations. The question investigators faced was whether Marcus had gone willingly to expose agricultural fraud, or whether someone had silenced him to prevent that exposure. The scattered evidence suggested both possibilities remained disturbingly plausible. 1 year after Marcus Chen's disappearance, investigators have developed 3 primary theories about what happened during those crucial hours in October 2023. Each theory is supported by compelling evidence, yet none fully explains all the facts surrounding this case. The first theory suggests voluntary departure. Supporters of this explanation point to Marcus's partially written letter to federal agricultural inspectors and his recent inquiries about whistleblower protections. Marcus knew he was about to expose something big, argues retired agricultural crimes investigator Robert Hayes. He may have realized the personal risk and decided to disappear before making his accusations public. This theory gains credence from the fact that Marcus's truck was found unlocked with his wallet intact, suggesting he planned to return quickly or wanted investigators to find his vehicle easily. The anonymous tip that led to the truck's discovery could have come from Marcus himself, using an untraceable phone to direct attention away from his actual location. But critics of the voluntary departure theory note significant problems. Marcus left behind his elderly parents, who required daily care, and a fiancée with whom he was planning a December wedding. Friends and family unanimously describe him as someone who would never abandon his responsibilities without explanation. The second theory focuses on an agricultural accident cover-up. Federal grain inspector Sarah Lindquist, who had been investigating moisture content irregularities at Prairie Gold Cooperative, believes Marcus may have uncovered evidence of systematic fraud worth millions of dollars in inflated grain prices. Grain elevators handle enormous volumes during harvest season, Lindquist explains. A difference of just 1 percentage point in moisture content can mean thousands of dollars per load. If someone was systematically manipulating readings across multiple cooperatives, we're talking about multi-million-dollar fraud. This theory suggests Marcus was eliminated by individuals involved in the fraud scheme before he could testify to federal investigators. The 3 untraceable phone calls could have been coordination between conspirators, and the meeting at the abandoned grain facility could have been a setup to silence him permanently. Supporting this theory is the discovery of extensive evidence of quality manipulation at the Farmer's Pride facility. Laboratory analysis revealed grain samples with moisture contents that had been artificially altered through chemical treatment, a sophisticated operation requiring significant resources and technical knowledge. The third theory, favored by some local investigators, combines elements of both voluntary departure and foul play. According to this scenario, Marcus was approached by federal investigators who offered him witness protection in exchange for testimony about agricultural fraud. The staged disappearance would protect him while allowing investigators to build their case without alerting suspects. Detective Walsh notes that federal agricultural crime investigations often involve extended undercover operations. If Marcus was cooperating with federal investigators, they would have every reason to make his disappearance look mysterious to protect their ongoing investigation. However, federal authorities have consistently denied any involvement with Marcus Chen or any witness protection arrangement. The Department of Agriculture's Office of Inspector General states that Marcus never made formal contact with their office, despite the partially written letter found in his desk. The federal investigation that followed Marcus's disappearance ultimately uncovered systematic moisture content manipulation involving Prairie Gold Cooperative and at least 4 other grain facilities across eastern Iowa. The scheme operated over 3 harvest seasons, artificially inflated grain payments to farmers while defrauding commodity buyers of an estimated $2 million to $30 million. Vernon Hayes, the Prairie Gold Board president, was indicted on federal fraud charges in March 2024. During plea negotiations, prosecutors hoped he would provide information about Marcus Chen's disappearance, but Hayes maintained he had no knowledge of what happened to the missing operator. Marcus was an honest man who asked too many questions, Hayes told investigators. But I don't know who would want to hurt him, and I certainly don't know where he went. Prairie Gold Cooperative dissolved in August 2024, with its assets sold to satisfy fraud restitution payments. The facility's towering concrete silos still dominate the riverside skyline, but they now stand empty, their conveyor systems silent. The cooperative's financial records, seized during the federal investigation, revealed irregular payments to an agricultural consulting firm based in Cedar Rapids. The firm, Heartland Grain Services, had no online presence and no listed employees beyond a post office box address. Investigators determined that Heartland had received over $40,000 in payments from Prairie Gold during the 6 months before Marcus's disappearance. Attempts to locate the principals of Heartland Grain Services proved unsuccessful. The consulting firm's business registration had been allowed to expire in December 2023, just 2 months after Marcus vanished. Bank records showed that Heartland's accounts were closed and funds transferred to offshore holdings before investigators could freeze the assets. Dr. Jennifer Martinez, the forensic botanist who identified the unusual corn varieties found at Marcus's truck, published a research paper in early 2024 examining the agricultural fraud case. Her analysis suggested that the white dent corn kernels represented heritage varieties that had been preserved for genetic research purposes. Someone with access to university extension programs or seed banks would have these materials, Dr. Martinez wrote. The presence of these kernels suggests Marcus's disappearance involved individuals with sophisticated knowledge of agricultural genetics and grain classification. The abandoned Farmers' Pride facility, where much of the fraudulent activity apparently took place, was purchased by a development company in March 2024. Before demolition began, urban explorers and amateur investigators conducted unofficial searches of the property. While no additional evidence related to Marcus Chen was discovered, explorers did find extensive modifications to the facility's grain storage systems that would have allowed for sophisticated moisture content manipulation. Yet Marcus Chen's story may not be over. During the 2024 harvest season, several agricultural workers reported unusual sightings near abandoned grain facilities throughout eastern Iowa. A truck driver hauling corn from Johnson County described seeing a figure in grain elevator overalls near the old Farmers' Pride facility at dawn. A combine operator reported someone matching Marcus's description, walking along a section road near Kelowna during the October harvest moon. Most recently, in September 2024, a grain elevator operator in neighboring Cedar County reported finding moisture testing equipment and grain samples at his facility after a weekend absence. Security cameras had malfunctioned during the time frame when the materials appeared, but handwriting on sample labels bore a resemblance to Marcus Chen's distinctive style. Marcus's parents, David and Linda Chen, established a scholarship fund in their son's name at Iowa State University's Agricultural Extension Program. The Marcus Chen Memorial Scholarship supports students studying agricultural compliance and quality assurance. fields that Marcus himself had hoped to enter after completing his degree. Linda Chen remains convinced that her son is still alive. Marcus was smart and careful, she told reporters at the Scholarship Fund's first awards ceremony in May 2024. If he's hiding somewhere to protect himself or his family, I understand. We just wanted to know it's safe to come home now. The Iowa Department of Agriculture implemented new oversight procedures for grain elevator operations following the Prairie Gold investigation. Random moisture content audits are now conducted at grain facilities throughout the state, and operators must undergo additional certification training focused on fraud detection and reporting. Windham County Sheriff David Morrison continues to classify the case as an active missing person investigation. We follow up on every lead, every sighting, every piece of evidence that comes in, Morrison states. Marcus Chen is still out there somewhere, and we're going to find him. But questions remain that may never be fully answered. Why did Marcus drive to the abandoned grain facility that October night? Who made those 3 mysterious phone calls? What happened during the 8 minutes between when his phone signal disappeared and when the anonymous tip led investigators to his truck? Most importantly, if Marcus Chen discovered evidence of agricultural fraud worth millions of dollars, who else knew what he had found? And how far would they go to keep those secrets buried? As harvest season returns to the Iowa prairie each October, farmers still speak of Marcus Chen, the 3rd-generation grain elevator operator, who vanished into the autumn night, leaving behind only scattered corn kernels and unanswered questions that continue to haunt the agricultural communities of eastern Iowa. The towering silos of the defunct Prairie Gold Cooperative stand as silent monuments to a mystery that remains unsolved. In their shadows, the questions persist. Was Marcus Chen a whistleblower who paid the ultimate price for trying to expose agricultural fraud? Did he voluntarily disappear to protect himself and his family? Or is he still out there somewhere, waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth about what really happened during that midnight harvest? If this case stays with you, you're not alone. Here at Unresolved America, we cover cases like this every single day. Stories that deserve to be remembered, questions that refuse to fade. If you want to keep these investigations alive, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a case. Drop a like if this story moved you, and leave a comment telling us which detail haunts you most. Until tomorrow, stay curious, stay vigilant, and never stop asking questions.